My family told me not to bother visiting Grandpa because you were never his favorite. At the reading of his will, the lawyer paused. He left everything to one person, he said. My mother smiled until he read my name. The silence was deafening. The lawyer's voice still echoes in my mind, but before that shocking moment, there was a lifetime of silence and dismissal. My family had always made sure I knew where I stood. At the edge, unwanted, unimportant. They said Grandpa never cared for me, and they repeated it so often that it became a kind of chant in our house. At birthdays, holidays, even ordinary dinners, I was reminded that I was invisible. Yet, beneath their cruelty, I carried memories of Grandpa's quiet gestures. Small, almost secret acts that told me I mattered to him in ways no one else could see. I grew up in a house where words were weapons. My mother wielded them with precision, cutting me down in front of anyone who would listen. He never liked you, she'd say, her tone sharp, her eyes daring me to argue. My siblings followed her lead, repeating the same line until it became a family truth. At gatherings, I was the one left out of conversations, the one whose stories were ignored. If I tried to share something, my brother would laugh, my sister would roll her eyes, and my mother would change the subject. There was one Christmas when I brought Grandpa a handmade card. I had spent hours cutting and gluing, trying to make it perfect. My mother saw it and scoffed. "Don't waste your time," she said. "He won't care." I gave it to him anyway. He didn't say much, just smiled and tucked it into his coat pocket. Later that night, I saw him smoothing the edges of the card with his fingers, as if it meant something. That moment stayed with me even when my family insisted otherwise. The dismissal wasn't just verbal, it was physical too. At family dinners, my siblings sat close to Grandpa, laughing and chatting while I was pushed to the far end of the table. If I tried to move closer, someone would block the chair or tell me to sit elsewhere. It was a constant reminder. I didn't belong. Despite the coldness around me, Grandpa had his own way of reaching out. He wasn't a man of many words, but his actions spoke louder than anything my family said. One summer afternoon when I was about 12, I found myself sitting alone on the porch. My siblings were inside playing a game with my mother. Grandpa came out, sat beside me, and handed me a small wooden carving of a bird. "Made this years ago," he said quietly. "Thought you might like it." It wasn't grand or flashy, but it was his way of saying I mattered. I kept that carving hidden in my drawer, pulling it out whenever I felt the weight of my family's rejection. Another time, during a crowded family dinner, Grandpa noticed me standing awkwardly near the doorway. He pulled out the chair beside him and motioned for me to sit. My mother frowned, my siblings groaned, but Grandpa ignored them. He wanted me there. That simple gesture felt like a rebellion against the narrative they had built. Even in small ways, he showed me kindness. A wink across the room, a coin slipped into my hand, a quiet nod when I thought no one was watching. Those moments were my proof that I wasn't invisible, not to him. Living in the shadow of my siblings was exhausting. My brother was the athlete, celebrated for every trophy. My sister was the golden child, praised for her charm and wit. I was the quiet one, the one who never measured up. Teachers noticed the difference too. My mother made sure of it. She'd brag about my siblings' accomplishments during parent-teacher meetings, while dismissing mine as average. I remember one school play where I had a small role. I was nervous but proud. My mother barely clapped while she cheered loudly for my sister who had a bigger part. "She's the star," she said, ignoring me completely. That night, I cried in my room, clutching the wooden bird Grandpa had given me. The constant comparisons shaped me. I stopped expecting praise, stopped trying to compete. Instead, I built resilience in silence. I carried hidden anger, not the kind that exploded, but the kind that simmered, waiting for its moment. When Grandpa fell ill, I wanted to visit him. I wanted to sit by his side, to thank him for those small acts of kindness that had meant so much. But my family blocked me. "Don't embarrass yourself," my mother said coldly. "He doesn't want to see you." My sister chimed in. "Why waste his last days? He never cared about you anyway." Their words were cruel, but what hurt most was the certainty with which they spoke, as if they truly believed it. I stayed home, pacing my room, torn between defiance and obedience. I imagined Grandpa lying there, perhaps waiting for me, perhaps wondering why I hadn't come. The thought haunted me. One evening, I gathered the courage to go anyway. I walked to his house, my heart pounding. But when I reached the door, my mother was already there. She blocked my path, her eyes cold. "Go home," she said. He doesn't need you. I turned away, tears burning my eyes, but deep down I knew she was wrong. The funeral was heavy with tension. I walked into the church, my steps slow, my heart pounding. The air was thick with whispers. My cousins glanced at me, then quickly looked away. My siblings stood together, united in their grief, or perhaps in their performance of grief. My mother's eyes found mine, cold and sharp, as if daring me to cry. I didn't. I sat quietly, my hands folded, my gaze fixed on the coffin. Inside I felt a storm brewing, but I refused to let them see it. During the service I caught fragments of conversation. "Why is she even here?" someone muttered behind me. "He never liked her." Another voice whispered, "She should have stayed home." Each word was a dagger, but I held my silence. I knew something they didn't. I knew those coins, those saved seats, those quiet nods meant more than they realized. Grandpa had seen me. He had chosen me in ways they couldn't understand. As the choir sang, I remembered a moment years earlier when Grandpa had taken me aside after a family argument. "Don't listen to them," he said softly. "You're stronger than they know." At the time I didn't fully grasp his meaning. But sitting there at the funeral, surrounded by cold stares and whispered judgments, I finally understood. He had seen the strength in me long before I saw it myself. The funeral ended, but the tension lingered. My mother avoided me, my siblings sneered, and I walked out alone. Yet beneath the weight of their disdain, I carried a quiet certainty. Something was coming. Something that would shift the balance they had worked so hard to maintain. For now I kept my silence, waiting for the moment when the truth would finally break through their lies. The funeral had ended, but the tension lingered like smoke in the air. I walked out of the church alone, my footsteps echoing against the stone path, knowing the storm was far from over. That storm broke days later, in a room heavy with expectation, where the lawyer unfolded Grandpa's will. The room was crowded, though not with warmth. My mother sat at the head of the long oak table, her posture rigid, her lips pressed into a thin smile that betrayed her confidence. My siblings flanked her, whispering among themselves, their eyes darting toward me with disdain. I sat at the far end, deliberately quiet, watching the lawyer shuffle papers with deliberate care. The air was thick, every breath weighted with anticipation. Then came the pause. The lawyer cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and let the silence stretch. It wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, a pause that made every heartbeat louder. My mother leaned forward, her smile widening, certain she was about to hear her name. My siblings straightened, ready to bask in the reflected glow of her triumph. I stayed still, my hands folded, my gaze fixed on the lawyer's trembling fingers. Finally he spoke. "Your grandfather left everything to one person." The words hung in the air, suspended like a blade. My mother's smile deepened, her eyes gleaming with victory. She tilted her chin, already rehearsing the speech she would give about responsibility and legacy. My siblings exchanged knowing glances, their confidence mirroring hers. Then the lawyer said my name. The sound was sharp, cutting through the room like glass shattering. My mother's smile froze, her lips parting in disbelief. My siblings' eyes widened, their whispers dying instantly. The silence that followed was deafening, heavier than any insult I had ever endured. I felt every gaze turned toward me, piercing, accusing, incredulous. I didn't move. I didn't speak. Inside my heart raced, but outwardly I remained calm, letting the weight of the moment settle. My mother's face drained of color, her hands tightening around the armrest of her chair. "What did you say?" she demanded, her voice trembling with fury. The lawyer repeated it, slower this time as if to ensure clarity. "He left everything to her." The air grew thick with disbelief. My siblings stared at me as though I had conjured some trick, as though the lawyer's words were a mistake. My mother shook her head, her voice rising. "This is absurd. She manipulated him. She must have." The lawyer remained steady, his tone firm. "The will is clear. It was signed, witnessed, and sealed. There is no ambiguity." My mother's fury spilled into the room. He was old. He didn't know what he was doing. She must have pressured him. Her words were sharp, but beneath them was desperation, a fear that the foundation of her certainty had crumbled. My siblings joined in, their voices overlapping. "This isn't fair," my brother shouted. "She never cared about him," my sister added, her tone dripping with venom. They demanded explanations, their anger rising like a tide. I sat quietly, absorbing their rage, refusing to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. Inside I felt a mix of emotions: shock, vindication, sorrow. Grandpa had chosen me. Against all their claims, against all their cruelty, he had seen me. The lawyer continued, his voice steady despite the chaos. The estate includes property, financial assets, and personal belongings. But there are also letters, sealed envelopes addressed specifically to her. He glanced at me, his eyes softening. Your grandfather wanted you to have them. The mention of letters shifted the air. My mother's fury faltered, replaced by suspicion. Letters, she repeated, her voice sharp. What kind of letters? The lawyer didn't answer directly. They are private. Meant for her alone. The room erupted again. My siblings protested, demanding to see them, insisting they had a right. My mother slammed her hand against the table, her voice shaking. This is a mistake. He would never do this. Never. But the lawyer's words stood firm. It is his will. His final decision. It cannot be changed. The tension grew unbearable. My mother's face twisted with anger, her confidence shattered. My siblings glared at me, their disbelief turning into resentment. I felt their hatred pressing against me, but I didn't flinch. I sat still, my hands folded, my gaze steady. In that moment, I realized the inheritance wasn't just about money or property. It was about truth. Grandpa had left me more than assets, he had left me proof. Proof that he had seen me, valued me, trusted me. Proof that their narrative had been a lie. The silence after my name had been heavy, but the silence that followed the lawyer's explanation was heavier still. It was the silence of a family unraveling, of certainty collapsing, of masks falling away. My mother broke it, her voice low but venomous. You don't deserve this. You never did. I met her gaze, calm and steady. Maybe he thought differently. Her face hardened, her eyes narrowing, but she said nothing more. My siblings muttered among themselves, their anger simmering, but the lawyer's presence kept them from exploding further. The meeting ended with tension unresolved, the air thick with resentment. My mother stormed out, my siblings trailing behind her, their whispers sharp and bitter. I remained seated, waiting until the room emptied, the lawyer gathering his papers quietly. Before leaving, he handed me a sealed envelope. He wanted you to read this first, he said softly. I held it in my hands, the weight of it heavier than any inheritance. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. I held it in my hands as the lawyer's footsteps faded down the hallway, leaving me alone in that suffocating room. My family had stormed out minutes earlier, their voices still echoing in the corridor. Accusations, disbelief, venom. I sat quietly, staring at the seal, afraid to break it yet knowing I had to. I opened it slowly, the paper crisp beneath my fingers. Inside were several letters, each folded neatly, each bearing my name in Grandpa's handwriting. My breath caught. His script was steady, deliberate, the kind of writing that carried weight. I unfolded the first letter and began to read. Do not let them convince you are less, it began. I have watched you endure their cruelty with dignity. You are stronger than they will ever admit. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. He had seen me. All those years of silence, of being pushed aside, of being told I was invisible, he had noticed. He had chosen me not out of pity but out of recognition. Each letter revealed more. His disappointment in how the family treated me, his admiration for my quiet resilience, his belief that I would carry his legacy with integrity. I read until the room grew dim, the letters spread across the table like fragments of truth. They weren't just explanations. They were affirmations, proof that I had mattered to him in ways no one else had understood. The inheritance itself was vast. Land, savings, heirlooms. But I knew flaunting it would only feed their narrative. Instead, I chose to use it wisely in ways that reflected Grandpa's values. He had always believed in hard work, in building something meaningful. So I invested in restoring his land, turning it into something that honored his memory. I repaired the old farmhouse, planted orchards, and opened the doors to neighbors who remembered him fondly. Word spread quickly. People came to see the orchards, to share stories about Grandpa, to thank me for keeping his spirit alive. My family, meanwhile, watched from a distance, their jealousy simmering. They had expected me to squander it, to prove them right. Instead, every choice I made proved them wrong. Their downfall began quietly. My mother, consumed by bitterness, tried to challenge the will in court. She claimed manipulation, insisted Grandpa had been confused. But the letters destroyed her argument. Each one was dated, signed, clear in its intent. The judge dismissed her case, leaving her humiliated. My siblings turned on each other next. My brother accused my sister of failing to support their mother's claim. My sister accused him of being selfish, of only caring about money. Their unity fractured, their whispers turned into arguments, their arguments into shouting matches. I stayed silent, watching from afar, knowing their greed was undoing them. My revenge was quiet, deliberate. I didn't need to raise my voice or prove myself with words. The inheritance itself was my answer. Every orchard I planted, every letter I held close, every neighbor who praised my efforts, it all spoke louder than any argument. Grandpa had trusted me most, and that trust was undeniable. One evening my mother came to the farmhouse. She stood at the gate, her face pale, her eyes sharp. "You think this makes you better than us?" she asked, her voice trembling. I looked at her calmly. "No," I said. "It just means he believed in me." Her lips tightened, her eyes filled with anger, but she said nothing more. She turned and walked away, her footsteps heavy against the gravel. In the weeks that followed, I found peace in the work. I spent mornings tending the orchards, afternoons reading Grandpa's letters, evenings listening to the quiet hum of the land. Each day felt like a step out of the shadow they had kept me in. The letters became my guide. In one, Grandpa wrote, "Revenge is not in shouting. It is in living well, in proving them wrong without a word." I carried that line with me, letting it shape my choices. My siblings continued to fight, their resentment consuming them. My mother withdrew, her bitterness isolating her. I didn't intervene. Their downfall was their own doing. My victory was in silence, in the life I built, in the legacy I carried forward. Closure came not in triumph but in peace. I stood one evening at the edge of the orchard, the sun setting behind the trees, the air filled with the scent of blossoms. I thought of Grandpa, of his quiet gestures, of his letters. I realized I no longer needed their approval, their recognition, their acceptance. I had something greater: his belief in me. For the first time in my life I felt free. Free from their shadows, free from their cruelty, free to live as myself. The inheritance was more than wealth. It was a legacy, a truth, a quiet revenge that spoke louder than any words. And in that silence I found peace.